Welcome back to English Through Wisdom. I hope you learned something valuable from our last lesson. It is wonderful to have you here again today. In this video, we will explore a beautiful Japanese proverb about fear and courage. By the end, you will understand its meaning, and you will also learn some useful new English words along the way. Part 1: Getting Started. Somewhere in Japan, a young man once stood outside his father's shop for almost an hour, too afraid to open the door. Inside was a conversation he had rehearsed in his mind 100 times, and it still terrified him. What he did not know yet was that the moment he feared the most would take less than 5 minutes to actually happen. Today we will learn a piece of Japanese wisdom that explains why our fears are almost always bigger than reality itself. Let's discover its wisdom together. Part 2: The Proverb. Today's wisdom comes from Japan, and it is written like this. A simple English translation is, "Giving birth is easier than worrying about it." In everyday use, people often translate it more freely as, "Fear is worse than the actual danger," or, "Doing something is easier than fearing it." The proverb uses two important ideas. The word anzuru means to worry or to feel anxious. The word umo means to give birth. Together, the saying compares the fear a mother feels before childbirth to the event itself. Childbirth is difficult, there is no doubt about that, but many mothers say that once it begins, it happens faster and feels more manageable than the anxious weeks of imagining it beforehand. Over time, Japanese speakers began using this proverb far beyond childbirth. People now say it before job interviews, difficult conversations, exams, or any situation that feels frightening in advance. It has become a gentle reminder that our imagination often creates a monster far larger than the real challenge waiting for us. This kind of wisdom is not only Japanese. Many cultures around the world have similar sayings, because the feeling it describes is deeply human. We have all spent nights awake, imagining the worst version of something that, in the end, turned out to be manageable. That is exactly why this proverb still matters today, in a world full of new fears, new pressures, and new reasons to worry before we even begin. Part 3: The Story. Kenji had worked in his father's bookstore since he was old enough to reach the counter. The shop was small, tucked into a quiet street in Kyoto, with wooden shelves that had been repaired so many times that no one remembered their original color. His grandfather opened the shop after the war. His father had spent his entire life behind that same counter. Everyone in the neighborhood expected that one day, Kenji would do the same. For years, Kenji told himself he was content. He liked the smell of old paper, the quiet mornings, the regular customers who greeted him by name. But there was something else inside him, something he rarely allowed himself to think about. Ever since he was a teenager, Kenji had loved photography. He saved money for his first camera by working extra hours after school. On his days off, he would walk through the city for hours, capturing light on temple rooftops, steam rising from noodle shops, old men feeding pigeons in the park. One afternoon, everything changed. Kenji received an email from a photography studio in Tokyo. They had seen his work online, and they wanted to offer him a position as a junior photographer. It was a small studio, the pay was modest, and success was far from guaranteed. But it was real, and it was his. He read the email 3 times, then closed his laptop and sat in silence. He should have felt joy. Instead, he felt something closer to fear. How could he tell his father? 3 generations of the family had run this shop. His father rarely spoke about his own dreams, but Kenji always sensed that the bookstore meant everything to him, perhaps more than he ever admitted out loud. For the next 3 weeks, Kenji carried the secret like a stone in his chest. He imagined the conversation 100 different ways, and none of them ended well. In his mind, his father's face turned pale with disappointment. In his mind, his father asked quietly, "After everything our family built, you want to leave?" In his mind, silence filled the shop for days afterward, thick and unbearable. He lost sleep. He became distracted at work, misplacing books, forgetting orders, staring blankly at customers who spoke to him twice before he answered. His mother noticed something was wrong, but Kenji only shook his head and said he was tired. The night before he had promised himself he would finally speak, Kenji barely slept at all. He lay awake, rehearsing sentences, deleting them in his mind, starting again. By morning, his eyes were heavy and his stomach felt tight with dread. That evening, after the shop closed and the last customer had gone, Kenji stood by the door for almost an hour, unable to move. His father was quietly organizing books nearby, unaware of the storm happening inside his son. Finally, Kenji forced his feet to cross the room. "Father," he said, his voice unsteady, "I need to tell you something." His father looked up, calm as always. Kenji took a breath and let the words fall out all at once: the studio, the offer, Tokyo, photography, everything he had held inside for weeks. Then he waited, bracing himself for disappointment. His father was quiet for a moment. Then, to Kenji's surprise, something like relief crossed his face. He set down the book in his hands and said, "I wondered how long it would take you to tell me." Kenji blinked. "You knew." "I suspected," his father said. "I have watched you look at this shop for years the way I once looked at my old guitar." Kenji had never heard his father mention a guitar before. His father smiled, a little sadly. "When I was young, I wanted to become a musician. I never told my own father. I was too afraid of disappointing him, so I said nothing, and the years passed, and the chance disappeared. I have thought about that decision for 30 years. He placed a hand on Kenji's shoulder. "I do not want you to spend 30 years wondering the same thing." The conversation Kenji had feared for 3 weeks lasted less than 5 minutes. There was no anger, no silence, no unbearable pause. Only his father's steady voice and, underneath it, something that felt like pride. Walking home that night, Kenji felt lighter than he had in weeks, almost as if he had been carrying an invisible weight without realizing how heavy it truly was. He thought about all the sleepless nights, all the imagined arguments, all the fear built entirely inside his own mind. The real conversation, once it finally happened, had been nothing like the disaster he had rehearsed. Kenji moved to Tokyo 2 months later. He still calls his father every Sunday, and sometimes, when he photographs a quiet street at sunrise, he thinks of that small bookstore in Kyoto, and the lesson he learned standing by its door, that the fear itself is often the heaviest part of the entire journey. Part 4: The Lesson. In this story, Kenji spent 3 weeks trapped inside his own imagination. He built an entire disaster in his mind, complete with disappointment, silence, and broken family expectations. None of it was real. It was fear, dressed up as certainty. This is exactly what the proverb, anzuru yori yasushi, teaches us. Giving birth is easier than worrying about it. The actual event, the actual conversation, the actual challenge, is almost always more manageable than the version our mind creates while we wait. Why does this happen to so many of us? Psychologically, our brains are built to imagine worst-case outcomes as a form of protection. This instinct once helped our ancestors survive real dangers. But in modern life, that same instinct often works against us, turning small challenges, like a difficult conversation or a job interview, into imagined catastrophes. Kenji's story reflects the proverb perfectly. His fear was not really about his father's reaction. It was about the unknown, about the space between deciding to speak and actually speaking. Once he crossed that space, the fear disappeared almost instantly, replaced by relief and connection. This lesson applies far beyond bookstores and photography studios. Think about the last time you avoided sending an important message, asking for help, admitting a mistake, or making a big decision. How many sleepless nights did you spend imagining outcomes that never actually happened? Here are some questions worth sitting with. Have you ever avoided a conversation for weeks, only to find it was easier than expected once it finally happened? Have you ever let fear make a decision for you, simply because you never gave reality a chance to respond? What is one thing you have been anzuru, one thing you have been quietly worrying about, that you could finally give birth to, this week? The wisdom of this old saying is simple, but it is not easy. Worry feels safe because it keeps us from acting. But real growth almost always lives on the other side of that first difficult step. Part 5, English Lesson. Here are some important words from today's story. Try to use them in your own sentences this week. Hesitate, verb, to pause before doing something because you feel unsure or afraid. Kenji hesitated outside the shop for almost an hour. Dread, noun and verb, a strong feeling of fear about something that is going to happen. He felt a deep dread before the conversation. Rehearse, verb, to practice something, often in your mind, before doing it for real. He rehearsed the conversation 100 times. Overwhelmed, adjective, feeling too much emotion or pressure to cope easily. Kenji felt overwhelmed by his own fear. Legacy, noun, something passed down from previous generations. The bookstore was his family's legacy. Disappointment, noun, the feeling of sadness when something does not meet your hopes. He feared his father's disappointment. Unsteady, adjective, shaking slightly, often because of nervousness. His voice was unsteady as he spoke. Relief, noun, the feeling of comfort after fear or worry disappears. Relief crossed his father's face. Reveal, verb, to make something known that was previously hidden. His father revealed his own old dream. Unbearable, adjective, too difficult or painful to accept or continue. He imagined an unbearable silence. Manageable, adjective, able to be handled or controlled without too much difficulty. The real conversation felt far more manageable. Catastrophe, noun, a sudden and very serious disaster. His mind had built a catastrophe that never happened. Part 6, Conclusion. Today we learned the Japanese proverb, anzuru yori yasushi, giving birth is easier than worrying about it. Through Kenji's story, we saw how fear can grow far larger than reality, and how one honest conversation can dissolve weeks of imagined disaster. The final takeaway is simple. Do not let worry write the ending before the story even begins. If you enjoyed learning English through this ancient saying, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need this wisdom today. Until next time, keep learning English and keep collecting wisdom from around the world.